Hi, I'm sure you've heard it before. It's not what you know, but who you know. And that you need sponsors to succeed in the workplace or to gain new customers through referrals. Well, two things can be true. Yes, having sponsors are a great advantage. However, you need to also be able to build your own social capital. And then in the case of borrowing it by having sponsors and referrals is a good thing too. But it's not one or the other. It's both. It's very important that you realize that whether you are a introvert or extrovert. The title of this series so far has been The Introvert's Guide to Leadership. And this is the third installment, which is talking about stakeholder engagement. And you will need to both borrow and build your own social capital to have successful stakeholder engagement. My name is Alicia M. Morgan. I am an aerospace and industrial engineer. I've worked in the aviation and defense industry at Fortune 500 companies. I have worked in the nonprofit sector, supporting STEM education programs as an executive leader. I've supported after-school programs and workforce and career readiness programs. I am project management certified and have led several high-performing teams to award-winning success. That does not happen without both building and borrowing social capital and using that to successfully engage with stakeholders to have high impact. So let's talk about what that means. When you are engaging with stakeholders and you're going to a discovery call or meeting, you should take really good notes and take notes by writing it down and reflecting throughout the discussion, asking clarifying questions, not asking questions to confirm something that you think may be the answer. So tell me more. What am I missing? Are there some blind spots? What are your needs right now? And how can we get to future success and be forward thinking? And as you write these things down, if there are awkward or silent moments, you can bring up some of those things that you've written down to reflect back and make sure that you understand what's going on. Your key thing you're trying to do in that initial meeting is to discover as much as possible and show that you're eager to learn, very eager to learn, and really understand how you came into that discussion. Who owns that relationship? Remember, we talked about being able to build and borrow your own social capital. So if it's your own social capital, you may be a little bit more comfortable versus if you're borrowing it from someone else, that's a different dynamic. And the reason why all this is important, I don't want you to think about if you go in the meeting and you think you have all the answers and you're going to show how you're going to have a lot of high impact working with the client, they're also going to want to know you. A great example of that, I am an engineer, and I talk in this series about me going from an engineer to an innovator. And being an innovator, you have to win your own resources, win resources to do whatever it is you set out to do. I was at this time in a fundraising capacity, leading an education department at a museum, as I mentioned. And some of my credibility in that aspect was it was an aviation museum. So I have an aerospace engineering background. So that shows some of my credibility in the industry. And I was showing how we increased our programs. We were serving 30,000 something students when I first arrived, and we're at over 45,000 in less than 2 years. We had a lot of schools coming in, a lot of successful programs. We were getting some fundraising dollars in, and we were talking to this new funder to gain some additional funding. So I'm talking about all the things that I think are our outputs and our outcomes and our high impact. And the funder turned to me and said, "Oh, all of that sounds good. But who are you? I want to know the person leading. I want to know the person understands the mission. I want to know the person has integrity. I want to know the person can have an engaging conversation without sounding like it's scripted. That really taught me a lesson as you go into meetings. And you may be representing yourself or a company, etc. But it's not always about just the data. So it's not just you have to have that quantitative and qualitative data. The stories, not just data or not just stories, both. Remember, we're talking as you are building and borrowing social capital. So always have that additional context. You don't have to share everything prematurely, of course, because you are listening more. But if that should arise, you'll have that backup information available. And again, you're eager to learn and feedback. Remember, it's not always about just standing out with what you think is the solution, but is that valuable to what the customer needs? Just thinking about if it was your resume, right? You won't go into a discussion giving every detail of your resume. You will go in sharing what's vital to that conversation, what's important to that conversation. So thinking about your pitch decks, what's important to that conversation, because there become a point in that conversation where you will see it's going well, or it may be veering off, and you can bring that back to some sense of direction. And as you're asking those clarifying questions and capturing that information, you're somewhat going through a empathy mapping process. For those of you familiar with that, you're figuring out what people think, feel, hear, and see. And from there, you are discovering their pain points. And as you discover their pain points, you want to identify how you can help them win from that pain points to getting some impact, that journey there, what you propose it to be. And then you will have follow-up discussions. And because you've taken notes, you can say, since our last meeting, we had these concerns, you had these concerns. Are they the same? And as you are digging deeper and sometimes getting more in the weeds, you have to understand the tactical day-to-day that's involved in solving the problem. You will discover that there may be some more stakeholders. So you can ask, is there someone else that I need to invite to this meeting? Think about your RACI chart. If you're doing a RACI chart, who's responsible, accountable, you're consulting, or who needs to be informed. And that can change. So your stakeholder register can increase based on the complexity of the problem as you start to define the pathway to the solution. So remember that. And remember, stakeholders come in all ages. I learned that, and you're really developing those 4 factors of trust we talked about in the first part of this Introverts Guide to Leadership series. It's humanity, transparency, reliability, and capability. An example of that, as we think about education initiatives, I told you that I've started off in engineering, worked in manufacturing environments, and then I also ventured off into education. So I was leading an after-school program, and I was leading for K to second grade students. The first day, a student comes up to me that's about 5 or 6 years old and asked if I was the new teacher. And I said, yes, of course. And the next question they asked was, will you be back tomorrow? And I said, of course. And I got to stare down. We'll see. Are you sure? We'll see. And the student walked off. And that taught me a lesson about stakeholder engagement. So when we have this ideal, like we're going to change the world, we're going to have this high impact on what we do, and it's going to be so easy and seamless as we think. But when we pull those layers back and discover what people think, feel, hear, and see about the problem, and to uncover all the multi-layers of the pain points, the path to the win is not a straight line. And once you discover that, will you be back tomorrow? Will you be back to continue that journey to that solution through stakeholder engagement. It's continuous. And it's very important that you don't walk in with the answers that you think that will solve the problem. And even if you are in a silo, I hope you're not working in silos and you work with some leadership and they've figured out what a project or initiative will be without engaging with all the stakeholders. And then you may be a project manager that has to go down and talk to the people and start a charter and figure out how to monitor progress. And then you realize you're stuck in storming because people are not buying in to what you think should happen. And that's where you have to get in the weeds and really engage with people. Of course, I always have a story. I was leading a project to rearrange a factory in less than 6 months with little to no impact to production. The decision was made by senior leadership, and I was the project manager that had to go down to the manufacturing floor and tell all the operators and facilitators that this was going to happen. And the catch is I had to observe them doing their work with a camera on a tripod. If you can imagine, I was met with a lot of resistance. And then when you think about stakeholder engagement, the resistance can be, are you here to disrupt what I'm doing and tell me I'm not doing my job well? And you have to gain that trust. In this case, I have to build my own social capital. I can't just borrow in this place because I don't have the influence. I don't own these relationships. So I had to every day observe what they're doing, write down their feedback about this project and how we're going to rearrange this factory. We have to update workstations, make them more accessible, ergonomic. We have to bring in safety and add more sprinkler systems and change power sources because we're removing and replacing equipment. We still have to be mindful of the production requirements. So we can't disrupt the circuit cards assembly while trying to rearrange a factory. We have to do this off hours, which includes sometimes weekends. And yes, I'm coming in on weekends too, because I am building that social capital. This project did have an executive sponsor. So I'm reporting to that executive sponsor who is lending the financial resources to do this project. So I'm reporting to them about all the aspects of the project and doing the budgets, the actuals, and all of that, the earned value to figure out we're on budget, on time, all these things, all these moving parts. So you see, in that case, I had to both build and borrow social capital. So those sponsors do matter, but it's not the end of the story. We have to think about interdependence when we think about stakeholder engagement. You don't arrive into a high-level position and suddenly you don't have to engage with all stakeholders. Eventually it will happen because you may have to step in, even if you are the sponsor, to mitigate some form of action or if you have budget cuts or et cetera. The importance of all of this is that stakeholder engagement is continuous and make sure that you captured information. You can have a verbal agreement all day long. If something changes, you want to be able to reference some form of document that shows what you were planning to do and some form of a stakeholder register, some risk register. So as you meet with stakeholders and you have some resistance, you kind of have to understand their risk attitudes. Are they risk averse, risk tolerant, risk seeking, and risk neutral? We would all love to have everyone on the team be risk neutral or risk seeking so we can just do all these great things. But even in the spirit of innovation, people are afraid that it will not pan out and it won't show some impact. Remember, this is all about impact and value as you go forward. Stakeholder engagement is fun and engaging when it's really dynamic. But in order to do that, remember, it's about who you are in addition to who knows you and the impact of your reputation and delivering on value in the absence of perfection, because it won't always be perfect. You want to be as transparent as possible. And as things happen and challenges occur, you can say, this is what you know to be true at this moment. You have to be able to think in the moment. I learned that leading education programs at a museum. It's live. You have customers coming from all different backgrounds. So if you think about your stakeholder engagement, you also need to think about the stakeholder experience, whether that's accessibility, the way they learn, indirect versus direct communicators, visual learners, being adaptable, sharing collaboration tools, having places where people can go in and find the information to digest it. If you are having a board meeting, can you send a board packet before the meeting so people can have an idea of what's going to be discussed to digest the information? You have dashboards where people can reference what's going on. If it's a factory floor, you have Kanban boards, visual boards where people can see the work in progress. So all those pieces matter. So stakeholder engagement is not just a meeting. It's not just a Word document or some collaboration tool you're using, whether you're in agile environments, you're using Jira, Confluence, etc. It's a way for people to see the flow of information in the best way possible, tailoring it according to the stakeholder. So you want to make sure you have a lot of options for capturing that information and how people will want the information. Because even the most fancy dashboard that you may have a stakeholder that says, I just want the Excel file. So a part of all of this in stakeholder engagement is being flexible. It's not one size fits all at all. You have to be able to communicate with technical and non-technical people. And you have to be able to be lighthearted sometimes, have a sense of humor, because things will naturally go wrong. But how do you recover from it and bounce back and plan the path forward? And remember, those 4 factors of trust really help you to be able to do that. Because if you're not always 100% reliable, because we may not be, but on a consistent basis, how reliable you are. You can also figure out how you're doing with surveys and feedback, your net performer scores, all those things. So just think about that as you move forward in stakeholder engagement. If you have found this video very useful, I hope you have, please like, share it, leave a comment, and let's continue this journey. And remember that whether you are an introvert or extrovert or somewhere in between, this video references the Introverts Guide to Leadership, because as my background, I am much more introspective and introverted in a lot of ways, but I've learned to be a great driver of change and successful in that by being that active listener and being able to both build and borrow social capital. And I wish you to do the same. Until next time, remember that it's important to understand how to build influence through trust and to continuously show up and get into the weeds when it's necessary.